I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Eileen Sullivan, and I'm the manager of the Los Alamos County Library System. It's my pleasure to host this program in collaboration with the League of Women Voters of Los Alamos and the Los Alamos Historical Society. As part of the League's exhibit, Women's Votes, Voters' Voices, which is showing right now at the Step Up Gallery on the upper level of the Mesa Public Library. The show is only up for 3 more days, so if you haven't seen it yet, I would like to really encourage you to come to the library and see the exhibit. It's really wonderful. Tonight's event is a Chautauqua program, La Nina, the story of Nina Otero-Warren by Deborah Blanche. You should have received hopefully an email notification with a link for a written program similar to a theater playbill. I hope you were able to read it and that you might even have a copy with you now. The program does contain biographical information about Deborah and about Nina. Since some of you may not be familiar with the way a Chautauqua program works, I'll take a minute here to explain. There's also information in the written program in the upper right-hand corner on the page that is kind of all text. First, we will meet Deborah Blanche portraying Nina as she was in 1951 for her 70th birthday party at the family home in Santa Fe. There will be a flashback to her campaign for Congress in 1921, and afterward, we will return to 1951 for more about Nina and her work. There will be 2 opportunities for you to ask questions of Nina. She will invite you first as if in 1921 and later at the end in 1951. We ask that you write your questions in the chat box and I can relay those to her so that everyone can hear the questions. After Nina leaves, Deborah will return and you may also ask questions of her. We are really part of the play in a sense. So imagine that we are gathered in the library of the La Casa Grande in Santa Fe on October 23rd, 1951, waiting for Nina to arrive. Wait, I think I hear her coming now.
Yes, dear, that's fine. Just put the centerpiece on the left. No champagne this year. Now, be sure to put the bourbon out in the sunroom. Well, you could spike the punch when Aunt Anna's not looking. I'll be right back, dear. Into the library to have a cigarette before the guests arrive. A new cigarette holder is not very useful without a cigarette, now is it? I thought you might be waiting for me in here. It's difficult to hide sometimes, even in a large house like this, with a large family and an extensive social circle, and especially on the occasion of one's birthday. But that's all right. I told you that I would share with you some of the highlights of these last 70 years, and of course I shall. So the question is, where shall I begin? Well, it all began with my birth now, didn't it? In 1881 in Valencia County, I was born to one of the most promising young couples in the entire territory. Eloisa Luna. My mother. Everyone said that she was the most beautiful and intelligent young woman in the entire New Mexico. Manuel Basilio Otero. Manuel Bed, he was called. My father. Everyone said that he was brilliant and gallant, that his murder was a tragic loss. I was only 2 when he was killed, and yet people always said that I was the one most like him. I don't think it's just because I inherited the red hair. The territory was abuzz after that shooting. Corridos were written and sung and published in the newspapers from the Rio Abajo to the Rio Arriba, ¿verdad? I remember the chorus to one. Went something like this, if you will indulge me. La Anita de Don Manuel B., residente de la Constancia, por defender sus derechos sufriste muerte sin causa. A senseless death, a land dispute. Well, you see, we had lots of land in our family, and we never liked losing any of it. We had land and sheep and houses and lots of people to look after it all and to look after us. Now, in turn, we, of course, looked after them. I can see that is difficult for you to understand now, 70 years later, in 1951. Well, I only saw the very end of that life myself. It was much more a part of my mother's life than it was of mine, and she never looked back. No, you could depend that on I was always looking ahead. I was making plans, seeing them into fruition, like most young people, I suppose. But I remembered the stories and the remnants of the old ways. It is important to remember and to honor and to keep those traditions that still serve. They simply add charm to one's life. And what is all of this? Aha, here is our clue. Anita, my sister, who runs the household, Aunt Anna, as the nieces and nephews call them. She's probably upstairs right now saying her beads in hopes that I will lighten up and be my usual social self this evening. Anita. She told me, I recall now, that she put a few things in the library for me to sort through. I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't put a few things in this pile with an idea to lighten me up a bit. Let's see. Oh, this. Oh my goodness. Now, isn't this just a thing for a lady of distinction, 70th year? I never liked hats much, hated wearing them. But then, of course, there was a time when a hat was an essential part of every woman's ensemble. Like when I ran for Congress, oh my, I had to have boxes of them for this affair and that. You know, I think this is about that vintage. Wonder if it still fits. Well, let's give it a try. Yeah. What do you think? 1921 was the year. I was 40 then. We had just gotten the vote for women through the New Mexico legislature, and it had been ratified by all of the states. So I thought the time had come for a woman to run for high office. I thought I was the woman to do it. Even my male relatives, politicos of the old patrones guard, veray, machos todo, they were behind me all the way. And I'd run for office before. I had an idea of how it went, what it took. I've been around politics since I was a tot. I knew I'd make a better showing in Congress than poor old Nestor Montoya had. Evidently, the rest of the party agreed with me, for I won the nomination overwhelmingly against the incumbent. So that gave me a head start, you see, in the stuffing. I went to every stump in the state to address it and to talk to the people. Oh, but that's political stumps, my dear. Even my sisters Anita, Estella, even May, they accompanied me from time to time in that old electric car of Papa Berger's. Buenas tardes. Welcome. Bienvenida, señora. Mucho gusto. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you for coming out this evening to hear me talk. I'm so pleased to see so many women in the audience today. And I hope that you are all duly registered and eager to cast your first vote in a national election. Just think of it. One day, ladies, we may have the opportunity to vote for a woman for President of the United States. And next year, you shall have the opportunity to vote for me, Adelina Otero-Warren, Republican candidate for United States Congress from the state of New Mexico. And so, without ado, let me address the major topics which I think are of concern to us as we go into this election of 1922. First, education and public welfare. Those of you who know that I have been serving for the last 4 years as superintendent of schools in Santa Fe County will not be surprised at my dedication to education. I am pleased with what our administration has accomplished during that time. Let me outline it for you. When I took office, school terms were irregular and varied at best. Funds were inadequate. Teachers' salaries had been either discounted or completely left unpaid. Facilities, equipment, teaching credentials, especially in the rural areas, were sadly inferior. But now, 4 years later, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to say that all schools are operating on full 9-month terms. All teachers hold certification. Rural high schools have been established. The facilities and equipment and teaching credentials throughout the system have been upgraded tremendously. All indebtedness has been paid, and there is a balance of $27,000 awaiting further improvement. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of business and administrative sense that I would like to offer you if I am elected to United States Congress. Thank you. Thank you. And now to the international issues. All of us have been involved in the recent war, the Great War, they call it. The war to end all wars, may we pray that that be so. I worked in Santa Fe County with the Red Cross there, with the women, and I saw them either Spanish or American or Indian, all working in some way, growing war gardens, selling and buying war bonds, making bandages. After all that we have suffered and sacrificed for this war, let me pose a question. What if similar resources and efforts have been put in the direction of better labor conditions, better housing, better education, better health? This, ladies and gentlemen, is why I support President Harding's proposal for international disarmament, that we may keep our resources and our men here and alive and working for a better way of life right here in New Mexico. Thank you. Thank you. It would be naive of me not to address some of the criticisms that you are bound to hear of me, particularly with regard to my work with women's rights and the passage of the suffrage amendment. I think of it, I would not be standing here before you today had that amendment not been passed. So let me assure you, ladies and intelligent gentlemen, that I will continue to do my best to work that all the economic and philosophical principles of feminism might be accomplished in the most rapid and efficient of ways. First and foremost on my list would be the passage of an Equal Rights Amendment that has already been penned by Miss Alice Paul. I would like to see that be the 20th Amendment passed through Congress, ratified by the states, so that the women of this nation can finally be full-fledged citizens of the country in which they were born. Thank you. Thank you very much. About myself, I'm native New Mexican. My family, Los Luna y Los Otero, have been active in public service and politics since the rule of Spain. And then you may hear it said that we are agringados, gringicized, perhaps a little bit too Americanized, even mixed bloods. Ladies and gentlemen, should you hear those criticisms, let me remind you that it was my family and others like them who guaranteed every Spanish-speaking citizen in New Mexico an education and also the right to vote in their native language. I stand by that initiative. Y por la ley, ¿verdad? To act and to serve where I have seen a need has been my mandate since childhood. In Santa Fe County, people have grown to call me La Nina. It is a term of affection, but also of respect. Not Superintendent Otero-Warren or Mrs. Otero-Warren, no, La Nina. I would feel privileged if, as your representative in the United States Congress, all of the constituents of New Mexico would grow to consider me as warmly and as confidently. For if I am elected, I will serve all the people of New Mexico, Spanish, American, Indian in heritage, rural, urban, mercantile, agricultural, male, female, adult, child. I will serve New Mexico as a whole. Sería un honor y una oportunidad para servirles. I didn't want this to be merely a political speech this evening. I wanted to answer your questions. I wanted to know what your concerns are about the issues in this campaign. Please, let me answer any questions that you might have about me, about my background, my family, whatever is your concern as we stand here on the brink of the 1922 national election.
So I have a question from our audience here. Do you have any children, Nina?
No, but I have lots of nieces and nephews, and I'm sure I'm going to have many more. You see, I was one of 12 children. My mother had 15 children in 25 years. 3 Otero children before my father was killed. She was pregnant, and I almost ready to have my youngest brother when my father was killed. And then she remarried, and then the Berger family. There are also 9 children in the Berger family, surviving children. I think a couple of my sisters are right here. Oh yes, there's Anita there in the back. And Estella. Estella's recently married Aldo Leopold, the famous conservationist.
So Nina, what have you done to help the Indian population?
There have been many movements to try to help have better welfare, better health, and better living conditions with the Indian population. And of course, I live very close to the Pueblos. And one of the things I would like to see, and one of the things I would like to forward, is better conditions for the Indian people. If I'm not able to do that as a member of Congress, I hope I might be able to continue that in some other way. The Indian school here, I've heard rumors, is not in the best condition, and the staff does not keep it as cleanly as it should be, and perhaps even the courses of study are not what they should be. I would like to be able to do something about that. I'd like to be able to help bring better health conditions to the people in the Indian reservation. I mean, think of it, here in New Mexico, during the recent pandemic, there were 70 sanatoriums in the state and very few hospitals. Very few hospitals. We had no public health system. That was only instituted 2 years ago. We have to bring our quality of life, our taking care of our people, our public welfare up to at least an American standard.
Does your husband approve of your candidacy?
Does your husband approve of your candidacy?
I'm sorry, my husband has deceased.
We had heard a rumor that you are not widowed but divorced. What is the truth?
Well, that would be shocking to him.
And did you win the election?
It's a little early to tell, don't you think? Wait until November and I'll give you an answer to that.
Is there anyone you feel is your true inspiration for women's rights?
I'm very impressed with Miss Paul, which, you know, I often wonder why we don't call her Dr. Paul. She does hold a PhD, you know, from the University of Pennsylvania. Why is she not given that respectful title? But you rarely hear anyone call her Alice. She's always Miss Paul. She and Lucy Burns have been wonderful leaders, amazing leaders. And of course, there have been there with the Congressional Union, or what became the National Women's Party. There are many, many strong and inspiring leaders among the National American Women's Suffrage Association as well. But Alice Paul made a particular impression on me. Margaret Sanger is another one that I admire very much. You know, I was in New York with my younger brother, Luna, who was attending a kind of at high school, but through Columbia University. And I went with him to start up his housekeeping and so on. But I also went there because I wanted a taste of what was going on in New York in terms of women's rights. And I got a full taste. I met some of these women. I met Miss Paul. I met Miss Burns. You know, I was able to converse with them and hear their ideas. It set me on fire in a way that I never would have been otherwise. I'm so appreciative of their leadership and of their inspiration.
Thank you, Nina. Do you think your concerns can be solved in your first term, or do you think these issues of housing, education, and healthcare will be issues 50 years from now?
Or will they be 50 years from now? Will they be still ongoing?
I certainly hope not. I certainly hope that how much can one accomplish in one term? One can plant a seed, one can get things going, one can generate enthusiasm. I don't think it's very difficult to solve all the problems that need to be solved in any one term. Mind you, I could be available for a second and third and fourth term. Let's get me elected to the first one first.
Nina, did you live in the Luna Mansion? Have you ever lived in the Luna Mansion?
The Luna Mansion was my grandparents' home. And you know the story of that? You know, originally they had a ranch house that was farther away from the community of Los Lunas. And when the railroad came through, they wanted to come right through the throughway that would have been very, very annoying by the ranch house. And they needed to buy right-of-way property. And so my grandfather sold them property in exchange for their building a home for the family in the community of Los Lunas. My mother was very impressed. She did a tour all around the nation and was most impressed with the plantation style of the homes that you found in the American South. And therefore, that's the way the so-called Luna Mansion was built. It's now occupied by my brother, Eduardo, the eldest of the Otero children. And he's also in charge of all of the sheep ranches in the area as well. And, but prior to that, it was occupied by my uncle, Solomon, which I'm sure you're all familiar with him. He was such a wonderful public servant here in New Mexico. And but prior to that, it was my grandparents Luna. My mother, Eloisa, went there after my father was killed, went from their rancho, which was in Constantilla, which is a very close little community. She went to have her third child, the third Otero child, and to spend her widowhood. It's also where she met my stepfather. So many fond memories of what they call the Luna Mansion now.
Those sound like wonderful memories. Do we have any other questions for Nina right now?
Then, in closing, let me say, oh, I do have some photos. Would you like to see some photos of my family? Let's see. I hope I can show these so that everyone can see. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
That's my mother. Maybe you couldn't see the large portrait behind me so well, but there she is. Wasn't she beautiful? Classic Castilian beauty and smart. My father, Manuel Vacío Otero. This is a picture that was taken of him when he was going to university in Germany.
Nina,
my father spoke 4 languages fluently: English, Spanish, German, and French.
Excuse me, Nina, could you pull that down a little bit? There we go. We can see him better now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to see the first one again?
No, the first one was fine. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, and here are the 3 Otero children. We look so staid and proper there. We were actually ruffians. And here you'll see the expanded family. This is my mother and stepfather and all the Berger children and all the Otero children except Eduardo. Eduardo was at the ranches when this photo was taken. This is on the front porch, so to speak, of the house that became La Casa Grande after quite a few renovations and expansions. It was originally a bungalow. It was part of the Fort Marcy officers' quarters. Aha! Well, this is a fun picture. This is me being more of a ruffian. Here I am as a young teenager, 14 years old, with some friends of mine at Los Lunas. I love to ride. And in fact, I'm somewhat famous at home for, rather than stopping and opening the gate to the stables, I just jump it. Oh, and here's a picture of me as I am now. And here I am much earlier in my communion dress. So in closing, I do not ask for your vote this evening merely because of party affiliation, any more than for the novelty of having a woman representing New Mexico in the United States Congress, not because of family, nor status, nor the lack of it, but because as an individual, you think that I am deserving of your vote, efficient and qualified. Thank you. Thank you. Mil gracias a todos. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was rather fun, wasn't it? What did you think? Oh, did I win, you ask? Well, almost. I only lost by 8% to that rancher from Raton. I don't like losing. I much prefer to win, like I did to get the nomination, 5-1. Now that is gratifying. But I suppose my campaign ended up being a little bit like the old Spanish dicho. Perhaps you know this one. Ir por lana, volver trasquilada, ¿verdad? One goes out seeking wool, one comes back sheared. You know, I often wonder, what would my life have been like had I gone to Washington in 1922? But I didn't. I stayed right here in Santa Fe, and I served another 8 years as superintendent of schools. And I was able to do something for the Indian population during that time, because I was appointed by the Department of Interior, Commissioner Burke, to be the inspector of schools and child welfare. And I found some scathing things to report at the Santa Fe Indian School. Well, actually, those 8 years were probably some of the busiest of my life. Involvement with the Spanish Colonial Society, the Pasatiempo Committee for Fiesta, on and on. Then I finally decided I needed to take some time off. And it was Mary Austin who encouraged me to write my book. Old Spain in Our Southwest. Here's the most recent edition. And I also was homesteading with Miss Medora. She is Mamie. Yes, I miss her terribly. She was my right-hand woman from the time we got the vote until August was when she died. She was my closest, dearest friend. Las Dos. That's what everyone around Santa Fe started calling us from the very beginning. We loved it. We became Las Dos until the very end. We even trademarked the name Las Dos for our insurance and realty company on Palos Avenue. We named the homestead Las Dos too. Oh dear, look at this old relic. Anita. She knew I would be thinking about Mamie and the homestead today. No hats or gloves. At Las Dos, you could be sure of that. More like an old sweater like this. Or, well, maybe work gloves or a hat for sun or cold. I like to chop the wood. Mamie kept our two little casitas tidy, made most of the meals. I spent my days writing. Oh, It was a wonderful time. A time when I could finally put into words what it is this country, New Mexico's land, its people, really mean to me. La gente, mi gente. To retell some of the stories that I had heard. Well, Miss Medores heard those stories too, traveling around with me to the north part of the country for the schools, for the Price administration. Historias de las luchas y los milagros, ¿verdad? Of struggles and of triumphs. For instance, why it is the farmers here in the north always plant crosses in their fields. Or why the bells at Santa Cruz have such an extraordinary, beautiful sound. Oh, the true story of the buried treasure in Gran Quivira. On and on and on. But think of it. As eloquently as any of those villagers could tell one of those stories, very few could read or write one in either Spanish or English. So, after my book was published, my next project was adult literacy. Oh, and as usual, I was able to parlay it into a paying position. Equally usual, I hired Miss Medores as my trusted assistant. We were off, training teachers, planning curriculum, incorporating those stories, the traditions, the cycles of the people, right into the courses of study. It was an exhilarating project. Why? Our curriculum was so successful that the federal government sent me to Puerto Rico to share it with the teachers there. Puerto Rico. Now there is a rich paradise of a place, lush, and the people so gracious, so appreciative. But as it turned out, that trip to Puerto Rico was the end of that job. A pink slip in the mail, you might say. When I got back to Santa Fe, I was almost 60 years old. I wasn't quite sure what was going to be next for me. It's 1941. When the entire world was patas arriba in 1941. You know? But I did get back just in time for the final plans of Santa Fe Fiesta. You can rest assured, no matter what is happening in the rest of the world, we shall have fiesta in Santa Fe. And I believe it was this old trusty hoop skirt that Anita put out right here that I wore that year underneath a dress from my mother's wedding trousseau. Yes, it was. Well, of course, I had to have my famous pre-fiesta party now, didn't I? I was home. Home. De La Casa Grande, Santa Fe, New Mexico. My family, my friends, maybe. Oh, and what a party we had that year, too. Oh, I think I hear some of the guests arriving. But that means we aren't going to be here much longer in the library, tucked away all by ourselves. So, well, if you have any other questions you would like to ask of me, we'd best do it now.
Nina, I don't see any questions for you yet, but we'll, oh, here we have one for you. Where did you get your education?
I was sent to St. Louis. Well, first I had tutors in the home, which was what you know is the Luna Mansion. We had private tutors for myself and all of the children. And then I went to the academy in Albuquerque. And then I was sent to St. Louis, to St. Mary's College there. It was the same and a different extension in St. Louis. My mother went to that St. Marysville in New York City when she was a young woman. And then when I came back, I became the teacher for all the younger children. And we played games, and that's where I learned, I think, that it was important to incorporate the needs and the interests of one's students in order to have success in education. I believe the same thing with regard to Indian education. You have got to incorporate what is known before you can expand that into incorporating the unknown. So unlike many schools in the New Mexico area, I will say that I always allow my schools to let their students speak Spanish. There was no punishment for Spanish in Santa Fe schools, at least not with my approval. However, I did feel, and I still do, that it's very important for New Mexicans to adapt to the American way, to be able to function in the United States as full-fledged citizens. And in the era when I was superintendent of schools, well, you know, the people in Washington, D.C. had no idea what we were like in New Mexico. They thought we all went barefooted and were wearing sombreros. In order to function in the national society, we had to be confident in English. That's a long answer. I've forgotten the question.
Thank you, Nina. What was the happiest time of your life?
I'm sorry?
What was the happiest time of your life?
Perhaps it was that time at Los Dos, writing my book. You see, when we took the homestead, one of the conditions of proving up your homestead application was that you lived there at least 5 months for 4 years, 20 months. So Mamie and I planned it so that, of course, the most seasonal time of year was when we went to Los Dos. And we had 2 little casitas on the top of a hilltop that looked down on the fields. Improving the fields was another requirement. In order to prove up our homestead, we had to plant crops. We had to create a water system of some sort, and we had to live there and have structures there. So our little adobe casitas were our structures. And well, maybe you would like for me to retell you a story, which is one that I do retell in my book, Old Spain in Our Southwest, about the crosses in the fields. Would you like that?
Sure.
Well, it's a story, you see, that is close to my heart because it's part of my own experience. As I told you, as part of our requirement with the government in order to prove out our homestead, we were to plant fields. So we hired some men from Tesuque Pueblo and Tesuque Village who came and plowed the fields. I was away doing something in Santa Fe when they were doing the work, but I came back, drove up the barely passable road up to our casitas, and I looked down on the fields, and there were the rows where the horses had gone and the plows had made the furrows, and every once in a while where the old cedars and pinon trees had been, there was a white cross planted on the stump. So I was curious. I put on one of my sweaters and I went down the hill to talk to Anastasio, who was the foreman of the work job. Now, I will tell the story as he would have told it to me, in that kind of musical quality that native Spanish speakers speak English. Ah, patrona, it is so, we will protect your fields so that they will grow well and produce abundantly. For you see, my grandfather, he told us in the olden days that we should plant crosses. Hay una historia de las cruces. Bueno, dígame, Anastasio, tell me, I said. And someone brought an old sheepskin and put it down on the ground by the campfire, and I sat down, and this is what he told me. You see, Senora, there was an old woman who was not right in her mind. Many people in our village, they call her a bruja. And yet, you know, it is the way with our people that we want to provide for those who are unable to take care of themselves. And so we always left wood, and women brought food that she would not starve and that she would stay warm. But the old woman was always out talking her way of this and that. One spring when the men went to plant the fields, she was out saying, no, what are you doing? You must plant crosses in the field, crosses in the field. Look there, look at the mountain. That's Las Trutas. There's going to be a white mantle the Lord will place on this mantle, and it will come down and it will freeze all of your young plants. Unless you plant crosses, is our faith less powerful than those of the Indians who plant their prayer plumes? But the men, they would go on. They would just shake their heads, nod to one another and smile. It's just the old woman going on and on as she so often did. But Senora, one day, as the little seedlings were just beginning to grow and were fresh and green in the fields, there came a rain, and the rain turned to hail, and the temperatures were cold. And Mother Nature, she laid a mantle of white through the fields, smashing and freezing all the young plants. The next morning, the men, they came out, and their shame was as great as their lack of faith in what the old woman had said. And yet, there was one field, an old couple, Patrona. They had listened to the old woman. They had taken heed of her words. They had planted little white crosses all the way through their field, and their plants were not harmed, but merely nourished by the moisture. And so it is. From this day on, whenever we make a new field, whenever we plow and plant, we also plant crosses in the field. Not scarecrows, Senora, como los gringos, ¿verdad? No. Las cruzas del campo.
Thank you
So
for
that's
that
the story
story.
Anastasio told to me years ago. And it's one of the ones I retell in my book.
Thank you for that story, Nina. What did you think of the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos?
What did you think of it?
Of course, we all knew something was happening there. From Los Dos, we could see the lights. And, you know, there were rumors, there were people in Santa Fe buying things at stores, some with foreign accents, definitely some with Eastern accents, definitely not New Mexicans, nor any of the writers or artists that had come to settle there. We didn't know exactly what was going on, but we knew something was. It was wartime. And, you know, it's a beautiful sight. I always felt it was a bit of a shame to turn it into a community, into a residential area. It's so wonderful as a camp and such a beautiful sight. Although I must say, you know, I'm a little bit envious of those who are living there. It is, I think, extremely unfortunate that there's any war. I would prefer that there be no wars. I have approved of international disarmament. I don't think we accomplished anything with the war. I will quote Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman elected to United States Congress. And she said, you can no more win a war than you can win a earthquake. But we had the seed of it right here in New Mexico.
Nina, what was the biggest challenge you dealt with in the New Mexico schools?
I think the biggest challenge, particularly, I'm speaking when I first took office, and I gave you an outline of that, school terms were irregular and varied. And that was difficult because there was good reason for that in some cases. The children were needed to work the fields. They were needed at certain times to care for younger siblings. We had to figure out a way to adapt that so that it didn't become absenteeism ad infinitum. We needed to figure out a way that we could incorporate, sometimes we incorporated parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts into the school curriculum at times when they could. And sent studies home with students that they could bring them back. We tried to cooperate with what was the cycles, the life cycles that were very important to the people at that time. But it was challenging. It was challenging, not because the people were resistant, because they, for the most part, wanted their children to be educated. They wanted a better life for their children. They wanted more opportunity. But they also needed those children to work at home.
Nina, which
one other, and that is convincing the Department of Education in Washington that it was important to incorporate local traditions and cycles into the curriculum. That was difficult. That was very difficult. They had no idea what northern New Mexico was like in the late teens and early 20s. They had no idea. As I said, they thought we were all, primitive, barefoot, brown-skinned, only Spanish-speaking idiots.
Interesting. That does sound like a tremendous challenge.
Reams of letters trying to give them a visual image of what it was like to visit a remote school in Santa Fe County. Oh, somebody should preserve those, and maybe in the Berger papers at the New Mexico archives, New Mexico Library.
We have one last question for you. Which congressional union organizers did you know and work with on women's suffrage, and which New Mexican suffragists?
I worked, of course, with Arroyo Lucero, White Lee, and my sisters were very active. This is, I'm naming New Mexican people. I mentioned that I'd met Lucy Burns, Miss Burns, and Miss Paul. There was a woman named, I'm going into the negative here, that did not sit well on her visit to New Mexico, and that was a woman by the name of Mabel Vernon. She was a Democrat from Texas, and she was the kind of Democrat that in the olden days particularly was prominent, and that was very much aligned with the old Southern Democratic ways, and had a very negative idea about anyone who had a browner skin than she thought appropriate, much less spoke a different language. She was also a very rigid WCTU member, Women's Christian Temperance Union. And she insulted many of the hosts here in New Mexico by giving sermons about why wine should not be served at dinner and so on and so forth. she did not go well here at all. But the other three, there were three others that came, and they were very successful. And this was the time too when we were shifting our focus, and particularly with the National Women's Party, what became the National Women's Party, the Congressional Woman, was a shifting of the focus from getting suffrage for women state by state by state by state, and getting a national federal amendment passed. And we could see, we had worked, women here had already worked for years when the Constitution of the state of New Mexico was written. You know, my uncle, Solomon Luna, was one of the people who penned that. And he was very much in favor of women's suffrage. And we did get suffrage for the schools. If no one in that particular county objected. And I'm sure you can guess which counties did. At any rate, they, and then we tried again, you know, on state to get an amendment to the state constitution. Well, that was impossible. That was definitely impossible. Particularly people from the southeastern corner of the state were very much obstructionist in our doing that. And we realized, you know, this isn't, you know, we aren't going to be able to get any farther. And think of how long it's going to take state by state by state through every state in the union. And that's when we started getting on board to put pressure on our federal representatives. Letter writing, newspaper articles, being out in front of the public, which is very much Alice Paul and Lucy Burns' technique. Some people thought that they went too far, that they were too militant. I just thought they were amazingly courageous.
Thank you, Nina.
Oh dear. Well, I do have one other comment to make before I leave, and that is someone did ask about my husband. And I do want to say a little bit about marriage, or at least my marriage, my experience of marriage. And, you know, perhaps I wasn't well suited for marriage. My husband, Warren Rawson, was the commanding officer of the cavalry that was installed at Fort Wingate. And, you know, that seemed all very romantic during the time that we were courting, and had a lovely wedding at the cathedral and a lovely brunch at here in La Casa Grande. And then I went off to, you know, Fort Wingate and was an officer's wife. And, you know, officers' wives can't make any decision for themselves. Well, I was hardly accustomed to that. You couldn't even decide who you danced with or not. You had to dance with an officer. You could not dance with an enlisted man. Well, I was used to dancing with the best dancers in the room. And then there was my husband's horse. You see, I wasn't supposed to ride it. Well, there weren't any spirited animals there for the officers' wives to ride. So I took the horse out one day. Well, that was a bit of a mistake. If you look closely, you can still see the scar right here from where I was thrown on one of the rocks. But all in all, by the time we went to Utah, I must say I was finding marriage a bit tedious. And then, well, I came back a widow. Oh, I think I hear some of the guests arriving. You know, I just told you a bit that even some of the members of my family do not know. So I can trust you, can I not, that we'll just keep this between us, all right? Because I have walked a fine line in my life between the old Spanish ways and the new American ones, between commitment and independence, a man's world and a feminist spirit, between the dictates of my faith and the, shall we say, inclinations of my character, between maintaining the position of my family and its class, as well as working as hard as I could for those less privileged, that they may be full-fledged citizens of this country. And still, you are going to find some people who just call me a snob, a frivolous socialite, they might say. Most people will say I'm stubborn. Perhaps a few that I am a saint. But rest assured, my dears, everyone will tell you that I am smart, even a bit wily. A hell of a lot of fun when you get to know me. Good evening. All right, here I am. Simple Deborah Blanche. Maybe
Thank you so much, Deborah.
well. I'll be happy to answer them.
So if we have any questions for Deborah right now, please put them in the chat.
Let me clear up the whole marriage thing right now. Nina did return from Utah with her governess that had been with the family since she was 2 or 3 years old. Teta, who went to Utah to pick her up on the train and brought her back. She came back as a widow. She never copped to being anything but a widow. I have seen forms that she filled out for the federal government. Marital status, widow. She never copped to it. Her second cousin, Miguel Otero, who was a territorial governor, did give her away toward the end of her congressional campaign in a comment that he made on a political speech by her opponent, John Morrow, in Raton, saying, oh, well, you know, Mrs. Otero-Warren says that we should play square, just like the children on the playground, but she's not playing square about her marital status. That never became widely publicized. You may find an article in the Historical Review about that, saying that they think that that is a major reason she lost. I don't think so. This was at the end of October that this comment was made. It was never completely specific. It did, however, create a rift in the family because Nina's brother, Eduardo, punched out Miguel Otero in the First National Bank in Albuquerque a couple of weeks later. I think, you know, Nina won all of the northern part of New Mexico, certainly all of the Spanish part of New Mexico, Little Texas, they killed her. And she only lost by 8%. That's not a big deal. But that's the story. Sometimes it comes out naturally in the questions and answer that she does actually tell people that. Somehow it didn't quite feel right today. But I wanted you to know that I believe the marriage was annulled. I don't think it was a divorce. I think somehow the family figured out a way to get the church to annul it.
Deborah, we have another question. How did you choose and prepare for this role?
I was given a book by my friend Anne Bertinette, who may be online at this very moment. And so my her sister and her mother in Arizona as a birthday gift. And it was this book by Charlotte Whaley, Nino Otero-Warren of Santa Fe. Charlotte lived on the housing development, and you know that's not a good term for it, which is on the site of Los Dos Homestead now. They're more like large acreages on which some people have homes. Charlotte lived in Dallas with her husband, and they were publishers and journalists and newspaper editors, and we're good friends with one of the niece's children, Berger Brown. And he was having a heart condition, and she thought, oh, you know, I'll just write a little pamphlet about his Tia Nina that he was so fond of. And she said the more she started researching, the more she found and the more interesting it got, and it ended up being an entire book. That's what I found out after Anne gave me the book and after I got in touch with Charlotte. Charlotte was very helpful. I met members of the family. I was able to interview people. I got details that I would never, ever have gotten. I was invited and taken to the two little casitas that still exist up on top of the hill in Los Dos. If you could picture where this is, what's that in the name of the golf course, the big golf course out by the Santa Fe Opera? Anyway, there is a development there, and then Tesuque Pueblo is kind of around, and Santa Fe Opera's up here. Los Dos is right in this area here. It's somewhat south of Tesuque Pueblo, south and east of Tesuque Pueblo, and west, and then west of the golf course and that big resort development. And from the opera, now if you were on the stage of the opera and you look south and west, that would be Los Dos. And so, and then there's all the books reading around. You have to read around the subject, read about her campaign. I've got newspaper articles with saying her campaign issues, what her platform was. And just keep reading around. And every time I have a question and answer, there's always something else I want to be able to answer better. And you just keep researching, it keeps growing. It takes about an average of 2 years for me to develop a historical character to the extent that you saw Nina this evening.
Wow, it's impressive. Deborah, we have time for one last question here. And also I wanted to let you know there was a message here. Anne, Joan, and Jane Burnett are all watching. Great performance. Thank you. So Nina, who decided, Deborah, who decided that Nina would be on the U.S. quarter?
We didn't catch that.
Who decided that Nina would be on the U.S. quarter?
On the quarter, who would?
Oh,
who
well, there was a whole campaign. You could nominate anybody you wanted for the quarter. Now, there was a site online that you could go to, a government site, that you could nominate someone. I wonder who nominated Nina. I didn't. I wanted to nominate, if I were going to nominate a Latina, it would have been Dolores Huerta, but they only wanted dead people. Right? So I couldn't, thank goodness Dolores is still alive and well and doing her work. And, but I did nominate Shirley Chisholm, who is my favorite almost presidential candidate ever. And I nominated Wilma Mankiller. Wilma Mankiller is going to be one of the ones featured on the quarter. Maya Angelou was already kind of filling the African-American slot. And then when Nina came up, I was really surprised. I thought she did not have the national scope to make it. So I didn't even consider nominating her. And then, what's her name? Rice, Joy Rice. Am I thinking about it right? The astronaut. I forgot. It's the other woman who's going to be on the quarters.
So, Sally Ride is here. Sally Ride in the chat. Also, it looked like there was a clarification, a kind of question about what you were talking about before. Buffalo Thunder Golf Course was the question. So I don't know if that was in reference to that.
Golf course.
Yeah.
No, it's one that has some professional golfer's name, and I don't follow professional golf, so I keep forgetting it. Some famous golfer, I can actually see him, but I can't call his name right now.
So, Deborah, I would like to thank you for the wonderful performance this evening. I learned a ton. I'm sure our audience did as well. Very, very interesting and very convincing performance, I must say. So We'll conclude our program for the evening. And I just, again, thank you. Wonderful evening and wonderful performance.
I want to thank everybody for their participation, for getting into the play with us. I want to thank David Pasquale, whose work became much more intensive, once we had technical problems a couple of days ago. Well, I could not have done it without him here this evening. So let's all give a great namaste and thank you, David. And to you, Eileen, for all of your assistance.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you again. And thank you all for being with us this evening. And good night.